It's time for the JMRA Football Podcast, a podcast for the fans, by a fan. Yeah! Here's your host, Derek Jones.
Hello, everybody. It's the JMRA Football Podcast. I am your host, Derek Jones, checking in from Denver, Colorado. Why am I in Denver? I'm not really sure. Well, actually, I am sure. I am hiking in a hiking excursion, and I'm actually, at the time of this recording, going to see a Broncos training camp the next day. So I'll get a chance to see Russell Wilson and Sean Payton in the crew, and should be a very interesting look at one of the teams that will be looking to bounce back from a very rocky 2022 season. The mission of today's podcast, BT Dubs, is to take a look back at 10 takeaways that I had from the 2022 NFL season as we get set for the new year that is technically already underway with the Jets and the Browns playing in the Hall of Fame game last week. All right, let's get to it. 10 things to take away from 22. Number one, and I talked about this last year before we ran into the brick wall in the course of the regular season. The NFC stinks, and we're gonna talk about the Eagles coming up here in a second, but I can't underscore just how bad it is. When you have a step back in terms of play from Rodgers and Brady, and thus their teams being impacted. Remember, the Bucs finished under 500 last year. They won the division, but they weren't a 500 team. The Packers didn't make the playoffs. So when you look at that takes the quality down in the conference. And then one of the other things, too, that was crazy towards the end of the year, one of the best teams in the entire conference didn't make the playoffs. Detroit was playing very well. Now they blew it, too, towards the end of the year, getting pummeled by Carolina on the road. But, look, Detroit showed that they could move the ball at times against decent teams. So they were one of the better teams in the NFC, but because of all the damage they had done throughout the course of the season to themselves, they didn't make the playoffs. Right now, the NFC really, and this is the case from last year, and it's the case heading into this season, there are 3.5 good teams in the NFC. The Eagles, the Cowboys, the 49ers, and maybe Seattle. That's it. You want to go down the rung, the Giants, I think the Giants are a one-hit wonder in terms of making the playoffs. I don't see them getting back this year. A tougher schedule. That's what everybody in the NFC East is going to face this year, so we'll see how they act with that. I think when you take a look at Washington, maybe Washington can be a sneaky team, some good vibes going on with Washington now because Daniel Snyder's no longer the owner. They've got Josh Harris in the mix now, along with Magic Johnson taking control of the team. We'll see if that leads to anything in terms of positive juju on the field. But maybe Washington with that defense can get something done, but I'm not counting on it. In the North, Minnesota, we saw what they were about last year in the playoffs. Had a home game, won a bunch of games last season, coughed it up against the Giants at home in the playoffs. So I didn't really believe in Minnesota throughout the course of the year, and they kind of showed you why. They won 13 games last year and then go one and done in the playoffs. Elsewhere in the NFC, Green Bay obviously taking a massive step back with Jordan Love now taking over for Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. Then you look at Chicago. They still don't have a good offensive line for Justin Fields, and I'm not sure Justin Fields is a good quarterback. You go to the South, Tampa, that is going to be a house of horrors, potentially with Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask playing quarterback for a team that still has a lot of the veterans that were part of that team that won the Super Bowl during the 2020 season. So, to me, they're really out of the mix. New Orleans, maybe. New Orleans is on that next line of teams that might be able to take a jump up. They bring in Derek Carr. They're a very competitive team anyways. We'll see if they're able to really kind of manufacture some of that defense and, again, be able to put together a little bit more of a meaningful offensive unit. They really weren't able to do that last year because of the quarterback situation. Look, when you lose, even though he was at the end of his career, when you lose the caliber of player that Drew Brees was, that's tough to replace. And the Saints have not even come close to replacing him. They hope that Derek Carr can kind of fill that void to some degree. Carolina, they could be good. Decent defense, decent line play, young quarterback coming in, and Bryce Young. I'll give them a puncher's chance, certainly, to win the NFC South. And then rounding out things, Atlanta, you don't expect much from them. I mean, they have some exciting young skill players, but defensively, I don't think they're there yet. They've got a long way to go, and offensively, they've got a long way to go as well. And then in the West, we talked about the 49ers. They're obviously a team you have to take seriously. You know, I mentioned 3.5 good teams in the NFC. The half is Seattle. Seattle's very interesting. I think Seattle could make a leap, but a lot of it's going to depend on Geno Smith. And if he is able to continue that strong level of play that he produced last season, because, you know, that was one of the big surprises from a year ago, Geno Smith leading the Seahawks to the playoffs. And when you look at the kind of year that he had, I mean, nobody was expecting that from him. Threw for over 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns. 30-11 from Geno Smith. Nobody thought that was going to happen. So you look at Seattle as potentially being a fringe team. Can that defense step up? They got blistered in the NFC playoffs against San Francisco. We'll see if they can kind of turn things around. And then the Rams won their Super Bowl in 21. I think, you know, they sold their soul to the devil to win a Super Bowl, and now they've got to figure out a way to rebuild without really a lot of draft capital. That's going to be a big problem for them. Arizona could be the worst team in the NFL this coming season. I really believe that. Just a lack of talent. They don't have their quarterback, obviously, with Kyler Murray not in the mix because of the ACL injury. It's just not a good team at all. Number 2, I really like Cincinnati, but, man, they better hurry up and do their thing because you don't get a lot of cracks at this. I know how deep the AFC is, and that's a part of this. You know, the Bengals last year get to the AFC Championship game, second straight year. They end up, of course, losing in controversial fashion to the Kansas City Chiefs in the title game in Kansas City. Look, they had opportunities to win the game. I think the other thing, too, that you want to take a look at if you're a Bengals fan is you want to stop playing these games on the road. They've played 2 AFC Championship games against Kansas City. Both were on the road. They played the divisional round against the Bills on the road. You go back to the season before, they played at Tennessee. So they keep playing road games. They don't have home games. If you are going to get to the Super Bowl, the odds are you're going to get it because you have home field advantage throughout the playoffs. I mean, that at least gives you a great opportunity to get there. And look at Kansas City. You know, Patrick Mahomes still has not played an actual legitimate road playoff game. Now, in theory, he did play one against Tampa in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, but he has not played a true AFC playoff road game yet. That's wild. And that's why the injury to Joe Burrow, I think, is really very disappointing if you're a Bengals fan because, hey, you got to be realistic here. If he misses any kind of significant time with this or is rusty to start the year, that's a major problem for Cincinnati. You can't afford to start slow in the AFC because you'll be playing on Wild Card Weekend, and then we'll be looking at the same thing over and over again. Kansas City hosting the AFC playoffs. And, you know, the Bengals have got to get out to a better start. I think having Joe Burrow back is imperative for that. And if he is able to come back, they've got to figure out a way to take care of business earlier and sooner rather than later because you don't have the luxury to lose, 4, 5, 6 games to get home field in the AFC. It's just not happening. Number 3, we go back to the NFC, and we talked about the NFC being lousy. One of the reasons why it's worse now is because of Tom Brady's retirement in Tampa. No longer, you'd have to think, really being a legitimate Super Bowl contender. And we've talked about before on the podcast about the concept of the 3-year window. And that is basically this. You, more or less, can go back to the well with the same team probably 3 times before you have to change some stuff up. And Tampa, they nailed it. But just in reverse order. I think a lot of times when you think 3-year projects for teams, you think, okay, first year, we'll figure stuff out. Second year, we make the leap. We're in the playoffs. Third year, we win the Super Bowl. Tampa got to the playoffs in 20 in Brady's first year, won the Super Bowl, and then went backwards. They did the I believe, the Benjamin Button? They went to the top first and then regressed all the way to the bottom. I think that's, for some of these teams, you got to take a gamble on maybe a guy who can change the culture in your program. And that's what Tom Brady was able to do. Clearly, that's what the Jets are hoping Aaron Rodgers can do in New York, because they are in desperate need of a culture shock and a culture change. And maybe he's a guy to do it. We'll see. I have some questions based off of last season. He really wasn't good. And we'll see if he can kind of mesh in with the Jets' skill players and really a team that, maybe not as good as Green Bay in a couple of spots, especially as good as Green Bay was in at the offensive line. Remember, Green Bay's offensive line was one of the best in the NFL during Aaron Rodgers' tenure, especially the last decade. I mean, they've had some flat-out studs along that offensive line. So we'll see if the Jets are able to kind of provide that for Aaron Rodgers. But anyways, Tampa was able to get that 3-year run, and now it's over. They are going back to square one. Now, when you look at the comments that they're making, they don't think that. They think they're going to be in the mix still. But the big question is, can they get one last squeeze of juice out of Baker Mayfield? That's a major question going into the season. I'm not sure that they can. Number 4, Tom Brady, the greatest to ever do it, greatest quarterback of all time. However, you could see he was ready to go, in my opinion. Not to say that he didn't like playing, but that last year in Tampa looked awfully similar to the final year he had with the Patriots in 2019. Just looked frustrated, looked bewildered at what was happening with his team at times, and you could see that there was just that magic that they had the first 2 years in Tampa. That was gone. It was harder for guys to get open. The offensive line really struggled to stay healthy. And that was such a major thing. I mean, the offensive line not being healthy, really from the start of training camp, that derailed Tampa's offense so much. They weren't able to run the ball effectively, and then they weren't able to throw the ball deep as effectively. Tom Brady threw the ball a ton again last season, but it just didn't add up to much because he didn't get the protection. The receivers weren't open. It was just a mess offensively for Tampa. They couldn't score, and it all came home to roost in that playoff loss to the Cowboys on Super Wildcard Weekend. But hey, I think considering what we've seen from other guys in the NFL in terms of how we've seen it in for other quarterbacks in the NFL, I don't think Tom Brady's going to lose too much sleep over what happened in that playoff game against the Cowboys. I think it was time. And, you hate to see somebody who arguably is the greatest football player to ever live kind of go away and fade away and get kind of beaten into obscurity by the Cowboys. But the reality is it was his time. And, better this way, better that way than what Dan Marino endured in 99 and losing 62-7 to the Jaguars in the AFC divisional playoffs. You don't want to see that happen at all. Number 5, the Buffalo Bills, man. Since 2020, they got to the AFC Championship game that season, if you remember, and played the Kansas City Chiefs and lost. And really, since that time, we've kind of shifted our thoughts with the Bills a little bit. We looked at the Bills as a Super Bowl contender, certainly, over the last couple of years. 20, they get to the AFC Championship game, and they lose to Kansas City. 21, they lose that classic playoff game to Kansas City in the divisional round. And then last year, they just got beat up by the Bengals. And I think, one of the things you look at with the Bills, they've got to find a way to get tougher. Now, look, a part of that, they went through so much last season. The Damar Hamlin thing was a tragedy. Thank goodness he's been able to get back out on the field. But at the time, that was just a nightmare ordeal for all parties involved. And, the Bills, that situation was just one injury out of a slew of injuries that the Bills suffered throughout the course of the season last year that really compromised what they were able to do. And if you remember, Josh Allen suffering some sort of elbow injury during the course of the season. That compromised his play a little bit, but the Bills just lost so many games where, something happens here or there, and it's them hosting the AFC Championship game and not Kansas City. You go back and look at the game at MetLife Stadium against the Jets, winnable game. You look at that game against Minnesota in their building that they coughed up, had a golden opportunity to win that game, they blew it. You look at the game in Miami against the Dolphins, they blow that one. They've got to find a way to figure out business and get tougher, because if they don't, they're really going to let this opportunity and this chance to potentially go to a Super Bowl and win one go by the boards. Again, going back to the 3-year window thing, the Bills are running out of cuts, man. 20, 21, 22, they're at year 4 now, really, with this Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs version of the Bills. They better get it while the getting's good, because due to the depth of the AFC, it's going to be a challenge to win in that conference on a yearly basis. Number 6. Look, it's okay. It really is. It's okay to say the Eagles played a light schedule. And a lot of the conjecture on the internet was that the Eagles fans were upset that people were saying the Eagles had not played anybody. They said, look at our record against teams with winning records on the year. I think people missed the mark with what the issue at hand with the 2022 Eagles was. And that was, to me, it's not about the teams you're playing. It's about the quarterbacks you're playing. Because at the end of the day, when you get to the Super Bowl, you're going to see elite quarterbacks. There's no way around that. You're going to have to beat elite quarterbacks at some point to win a Super Bowl. That's why fans clown the Eagles fans online about beating Daniel Jones and then whatever iteration of 49ers quarterbacks you want to talk about that they beat during the NFC Championship game. The Eagles, during the course of the year, let's go through it while we have a chance, because I'm looking right at it. They beat last year Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, Carson Wentz, Trevor Lawrence, Kyler Murray, Cooper Rush, Kenny Pickett, Davis Mills, the ghost of Matt Ryan, a beat-up Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers got knocked out of that game. Ryan Tannehill, Daniel Jones twice, Justin Fields. That's not great, folks. That's not great. And if you want to say this, they beat teams with winning records, you look at who they beat. I mean, it's 3 against the Giants. It's Jacksonville. It's Minnesota. It's the names I just read off, okay, in terms of quarterback play. Those are not the guys of record. That's just the case. Those are not the guys who are stirring the drink right now in the NFL. Now, oddly enough, the Eagles will see that this year because they're going to see Patrick Mahomes. They're going to see Josh Allen. So they'll have an opportunity to go against some different teams and get some, I think, meaningful experience. And the reality is, I think playing a harder schedule can make you better. I don't think playing a litany of not-so-great quarterbacks helps you get ready for playing Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. And that's what happened. Because when the Eagles needed stops in the Super Bowl, they couldn't get it. Now, will that hard schedule automatically just devalue everything the Eagles did last year versus what they're going to do this year? No. The Eagles will still win, in my opinion, at least 10 games. They'll have an opportunity to really make another run towards the Super Bowl. But the reality is now you're going to have to beat some of the elite upper echelon teams to get to the playoffs, to get to the Super Bowl, and to win the Super Bowl. There's nothing there's nothing wrong with playing an easy schedule. You shouldn't have to apologize for that. It is what it is. The schedule is the schedule. What are you going to do? But what you learn from that schedule is the issue. You look at Patrick Mahomes play in the Super Bowl. A part of it was mucked up in terms of the numbers because the Eagles had the ball for 35 minutes. But Mahomes was 21-27, 182 yards, 3 touchdown passes, passer rating of 131.8. The Eagles had seen nothing like that outside of a game against Dak Prescott on Christmas Eve where Prescott put up 40 against the Eagles. But, a lot of Eagles fans were like, well, they didn't have Jalen Hurts, so it wouldn't be the same thing. Oh, okay. That's fine. But the problem with a game like that is you're seeing the Eagles go up against elite offenses, and it's not so easy. That's the thing that if you're an Eagles fan going into the season, you have to be a little worried about. That schedule for them coming up in the 23 campaign, not easy at all. The Eagles beat the 49ers on the way to the Super Bowl last year, and that leads us to our next item. The 49ers got to figure out their quarterback situation, and I know right now they've got Brock Purdy slated to play and start, but he suffered a UCL injury during the NFC Championship game. The 49ers were woefully prepared at quarterback during the course of the game where it ends up, Christian McCaffrey's taking snaps at quarterback. Like, what are we doing here? And the thing about the 49ers in this situation is this. You look at their last 4 seasons, okay? 19, they win the NFC, they go to the Super Bowl, they lose basically the Super Bowl in the fourth quarter. 21, they get back to the NFC Championship game, lose to the Rams. 22, they get back to the NFC Championship game and lose to the Eagles. 3 NFC Championship games and 0 rings. That's not good. That's not good at all. And that's look, I think one of the things with the 49ers they have to be aware of, when the number one thing that is talked about with the 49ers offense on a weekly basis, in my opinion, is somebody who's not on the field making plays. They're talking about the offensive coordinator. They're talking about the guy who's calling plays. They're talking about the head coach, Kyle Shanahan. That's not great, man. That's got to change. I get that he's an important part of the puzzle, but, at a certain time, their quarterbacks are going to have to stay healthy and pretty much do this stuff when it counts because they did not do it. They did not come up big last season. Brock Purdy, for the most part, was good for the 49ers, but in the end, suffers that injury in the NFC Championship game. We'll see if he's able to come back in some way, shape, or form in a positive manner when the season starts coming up in September. The NFL's best division is in the AFC. We were right about that last year. We told you the AFC West was going to be the best division in football. Well, I'm here to inform you the AFC North is the best division in football. You look at Pittsburgh, near playoff team, almost made it. Baltimore made it without Lamar Jackson. Cincinnati, we talked about their virtues earlier. 2 straight AFC title games and a Super Bowl appearance, and they could have easily won that Super Bowl. It's a very good division. And then Cleveland, look, Cleveland is not a playoff team, but easier schedule this year for them. Another year of Deshaun Watson. We'll see if they can kind of figure out where they need to be. But those games in the AFC North should be exceptional. Should be exceptional yet again. And I'm very much looking forward to those games during the course of the regular season. Number 9. The Chiefs aren't a dynasty yet. The D word started getting thrown around a lot after the Chiefs won the Super Bowl over the Eagles in February. And this is the reality with a dynasty. To me, you've got to go back to back to open up the discussion and or win 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, or win 3 or 4 in a very short period of time. That's a dynasty. The Chiefs aren't there yet. They're close. They're close. They're not there yet. But I will say this for the Chiefs. They can't, that meme from Breaking Bad where Aaron Paul's character yells, they can't keep getting away with this. That's what you feel like when you watch the Chiefs play. How do they keep getting away with this? And they somehow do. They skate by every time. Close games, no problem. They figure it out and they find a way to win. And they did it again in the Super Bowl. And for the Chiefs, now an opportunity to make history and try to become the first team to repeat as Super Bowl champions since the 03-04 Patriots. Look, I know I've said some stuff about the Chiefs and, their window of opportunity to win a Super Bowl was closed. That was with Tyreek Hill, by the way. That version of the Chiefs, the Tyreek Hill version of the Chiefs, the window was closed. This version, if it's just going to be Patrick Mahomes just throwing to the wide receiver of the week, the Baskin-Robbins special, the flavor of the week, the flavor of the month, and Travis Kelce, and making enough plays to help out, an okay defense, again, they're going to be tough to beat. And will they win the Super Bowl again? I'm not sure about that. But when you take a look at kind of what's going into it, they have the best player in the NFL. They probably have, as the NFL Network Top 100 announced the other night, they have 3 top 10 players. Chris Jones, a defensive tackle, assuming he comes back. Travis Kelce, a tight end. And Patrick Mahomes. That's it. Now, you need a lot more to make it a Super Bowl winner, but they've shown that they can succeed with younger players. And that was a big thing from last year. They won with a young team. And that's also a very scary thing. And our last bit. The Eagles have spent all offseason talking about the field from Super Bowl 57. The Eagles have nobody to blame for losing that game but themselves. They don't need to blame the sod god. They don't need to blame, the slick surface in Arizona. The best team won. And that's ultimately the reality. The best team won that game. The Eagles were up 24-14 in the second half. I don't want to hear about a field if you were up 24-14 in the second half of a Super Bowl and you were leading in the fourth quarter. You are culpable for losing this game. Not the guy laying down the grass. I just, it's been an off-season of whining. Between them and the 49ers whining, oh my gosh, guys, get it together. And with that, we have reached the end of the line on the latest episode of the JMRA Football Podcast. We'll be back with it. So what I'm thinking of doing, by the way, before we wrap it up, we talked about switching things up a little bit this year. We're going to offer one episode a week that is not about football. I haven't figured out what that's going to be about yet, but it's not going to be about football. We're going to mix it up. Like Freestyle Friday, Wide Open Wednesday, something like that. We're going to change it up a little bit this year. So I hope you stick along for the ride. Should be a fun one. I'm Derek Jones saying so long. You can check us out on Twitter at Joe M's Right Arm for your football needs. Courtesy of Joe Montana's Right Arm. Until next time, happy football, everybody. See ya.